this country, if you work and you're thrifty, you're going to accumulate some things, or you're going to spend it all. And there's a lesson about use and investment. Once you have worked and you've accumulated some things, what should you actually do with those things? We read Psalm 34:1, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein." Pretty all-encompassing statement on God's part. He owns the ball of dirt. He owns everything that it is full of. He owns the systems that make this world work, and he even owns all the people. We briefly looked at the idea that money is just a tool. That's all it is. It's actually nothing very special. It's a tool like a hammer or a blender. You can use it for good things or bad things. God uses it to interact in your life because he's interested in you, and he has things he needs to teach you. The Apostle Paul went so far as to say that we're laborers together with God. That we know God is doing the work that is done in this world and in eternity, but he allows us to come alongside. The Apostle Paul also said that you are God's husbandry, you are God's building, you are God's field work. And what type of gardener might you think he is, or farmer? And you are God's building or building project. That is not what we're looking at today. That is not my family. The little girl in that picture is a girl on a colony in Mexico. She has a genetic disease, and we've been doing some work to help her.
Who shot the elk?
That is not what we're talking. That is what we're talking about today. Do you know what that is right there? That picture is. That picture is evidence of wealth.
Yeah.
And we'll get back to that.
Okay.
That's where we should be. Just about. Income versus wealth. Income is the opportunity that you have. Wealth is what you have accumulated or what has been passed down to you. The average income among Amish and Mennonites is about what? According to loan apps, we see at Anabaptist Financial, the average family is earning about 40 to 45,000. Now that is the borrowers. So that's actually not the average. The average is higher than that. There are people who don't need to borrow. There are the investors. But the average working class family is earning 40 to 45. But the average Amish or Mennonite family is actually fairly wealthy. What are some evidences of wealth? In our home congregation, on the Sundays when I preach, I usually don't stay for Sunday school. I'll come in the morning, go to preacher's meeting, and then to the opening. And then when the classes go to Sunday school, I go home and I look over the sermon or pray. We live pretty close to the church house. And then I come back at 11 o'clock while one of the other preachers is making the opening for the service and settle in, then get up to preach. And just this last Sunday, Sunday a week ago, as I came back into the church house, I stopped in the parking lot and I counted. I counted vehicles sitting in our church parking lot. I don't consider us to have a large church, but there were about 52, 53 vehicles in the parking lot that day. And I tried to estimate their average value. We consider ourselves to be a very average Amish Mennonite type church. We're not large. We don't consider ourselves wealthy. There were $1 million of vehicles sitting in the parking lot. And knowing our church people, as well as I think I do, I don't think there was a loan on a single one of them. They were all paid for in cash. $1 million sitting in the parking lot in vehicles on a Sunday. Do you know what it is? It's simply evidence of wealth. We're wealthy people. We have wealth. Just yesterday, I wanted a few snacks for my room, so I said there have to be some stores around here somewhere. And I did find some, about 20 minutes away. And I was going through the store, picking up a few little things, and it struck me that I was not paying attention to the prices. I went into the store intending to buy what I wanted. And when I walked out of the store, I had what I wanted. Do you know what that is? That is evidence of wealth. You're able to have what you want. Your wants might not be extravagant. I didn't have any filet mignon when I walked out of the store. I only have a microwave in my room. And it would kind of be chut if I did it in the kitchen and y'all saw it and, man, look what he's eating. Okay? But I had what I wanted. I look at all these people who are here. None of you are working today, are you? You working this week? I'm working some in my room, but most of you, you're taking off to come to FOCIS. That's good. But it's also evidence of your wealth. You don't have to work. Not this week. You have enough of money to come, and you won't be out when you get back. It's evidence of your wealth. We are a wealthy people, and wealthy people have responsibilities. Start with a little bit of a story this morning. We have a little farm property in Virginia. It's more like a hobby farm. I'm not a farmer. I don't make the claim to be a farmer. I keep some cows, and I keep cows as a hobby. I had cows when I was around cows when I was little growing up. You get lonesome for cows. Cows are good people to talk to. As long as you keep doling out a little bit of feed, they'll sit there and they'll listen for a long time. Now someone last evening talked about pigs. We've had pigs different times, and pigs are not good people. So I'm sorry for you if you have pigs, but I have these cows, and I have this little hobby farm. I like to go there, and I was working there one day not long after we bought it, and trying to put in fence post, and in a certain area I kept hitting rock, hard stuff. Well, the fellow that sold us the place, he lives just down the road, and he happened to come up in his golf cart, evidently heard me pounding away up there, and he said, well, you're hitting the foundation of the old house. And we started chatting, and he started telling me that that's where the old farmhouse used to be on this property years and years ago. It's a property he had bought from family members, and he started telling me a story about a treasure that's buried on that property. So if you would like to find a buried treasure, you need to come to Virginia, and I'll loan you a shovel, and perhaps you can find it. He said that years and years ago, this property was owned by two of his great uncles. They were single brothers, never married, and they lived in this old farmhouse, the foundation of which I was hitting when I was trying to drive some fence post. As I said, they never married. He said they were very strange people. They acted strange. People in the neighborhood were kind of afraid of them. Their relatives were kind of afraid of them. They had strange ways. They had big long beards, and they dressed in dark clothes, and they had lots of money. But they didn't like banks. They kept all their money at home. They thought it was foolish to put your money in the bank. After all, they probably grew up in an era where banks had closed and people lost their savings in the bank. And they also had something against paper money, that they wouldn't accept paper money in payment for anything, and they didn't use paper money. They used only silver coins. And before 1964, the coinage in the United States had silver content in it, and they liked silver. So they didn't use banks, and they didn't use paper money, and they were thought to have kept all their money at home. Donald, my neighbor, he remembered somewhat about them. He's an older man now, about 80 years old perhaps. But when he was a little boy, his mother used to come clean for them. Remember, they were single bachelors, and they don't tend to be the best of housekeepers. And his mother was their niece, Donald's mother. So she would come clean for them 2 days a week. She would come clean for them, do their laundry, laundry, do some baking, and she would bring little Donald with her. They would walk up the hollow and then up through the woods, across the field, and come to these two old men's house and do their work. There was a little ritual that played itself out at the end of every work day. One of the brothers would take little Donald and his mother in the parlor of the old house and sit them down and make them stay there. The other brother would go out the back door and go down to the spring, be gone a little while, and he would come back with her pay for the day in silver coins. That happened every time that they went to clean for the old brothers. In the process of time, the one brother died and then the other brother, and the relatives came to clean out the house. There was no money in the house. No one ever knew what happened to their money. For years, Donald said after he bought the property, he would go look for it. He would go look down around the spring. He said he never found a thing. Finally got tired of looking. He said it was kind of frustrating because other people in the neighborhood knew these brothers, knew about them, knew they had money, knew they didn't trust banks, knew they kept it all in silver coins. And he said he would find holes dug down at the spring. He would go down for some purpose and there'd be holes dug in the ground. And it really spited him. People were trespassing on his property. They were coming in at night so that he didn't know they were there. They were digging holes and not filling them back up. And then he had to go fill the holes up because he didn't want his cows to break their legs. He doesn't know if anyone ever found it or not. Christmas a year ago, we were Christmas caroling in the community, and one of the places we stopped was our neighbor across the hollow, old Mrs. Dalton. Old Mrs. Dalton, she never was a lady that said very much. I knew her about 20 years now, but she has Alzheimer's or dementia, some sort of a mental decline that she's experiencing, and old Mrs. Dalton doesn't talk anymore. She hasn't for years. She sits in a rocking chair or a recliner, and she just kind of crosses her arms and keeps her head down at her chest. But we go sing for her different times, and we were there Christmas Eve a year ago singing for Mrs. Dalton. Her daughter was there for the evening. She comes to stay with Mama overnight. And we sang, and then our group went back to the school for snack, and we stayed for a little bit just to visit with the neighbors. We live just across the hollow. That's where our little farm is. And I started asking the daughter about the property that we had bought. They were related there. They were cousins to the people that had sold us the property. And she started telling me about where the old barn used to be and where the old house used to be. And I said, well, do you remember, did you have two old uncles that lived there? Oh, yes. And she told me all the same stories I had heard before about those two strange old men. And then I asked her, I said, well, did you ever hear about the money that they buried down by the spring? And before she could answer, something unusual happened. Her mother, old Mrs. Dalton, sat up in her chair. And she lifted her head up and she said, it's not buried down at the spring. It's buried in cans in different places, and no one ever dug it up. And then she put her head back down and resumed her silence.
What's the name of your town?
I thought about that for a long time that night. I wondered what had happened. Was that dementia? Just an old lady who is out of her mind spouted something off? Or maybe sitting there listening to us talking about old times, did that old woman, who was a cousin to those two old men, did she actually know something? And did something rise up in her that she had to say, it's not buried down at the spring. It's buried in cans, in different places, and no one ever dug it up. Do you think I ever went and looked for it? How many of you think I looked for it? Raise your hand. How many of you think I didn't? Okay. Maybe I did and maybe I didn't. I do happen to now own a metal detector. A pretty good one. I had to save up to buy it because I didn't want to buy junk. We do that when we're wealthy, don't we? We don't have to buy junk. We buy good cars. We don't use Formica countertops in our houses because we're wealthy people. What type of people go looking for a treasure? Like if you come to Virginia, I will loan you a shovel. You must fill the holes back up when you're done so my cows don't break their legs. And we probably will have to come to some sort of an agreement to split any proceeds. But what type of people go looking for a treasure? I will tell you what type of people go looking for a treasure. Only the people who think it's actually there. The people who don't think it's there don't go looking for it. But the ones that think it might be there, or they're pretty sure it's there somewhere, they will look for it. Do you know what the Scripture says? The Scripture says that the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that's hid in a field. Only the people who actually think it's there would give up everything in their life to go find it. And if that's not something you're willing to do at this point, you're not willing to give yourself up, well then I would propose that you actually don't think it's real. Because if you actually thought it was real, you would. And maybe you do, and maybe you don't. We're talking about stewardship, and you probably think we're going to talk about money, but not today. Today we're talking about stewardship of something different and more important. You have many things given into your life for which you're responsible. You do have knowledge of God's Word, which many people don't have. You have the Scripture. You have things. You have houses, vehicles, jobs. You have income, bank accounts. You have personal possessions, the things that you personally own. You are stewards of all those things. They actually all belong to God. But you have other things in your life that are more important than the material things. These would be things like friends and family and church. And that's kind of where we want to focus this morning. A steward, these are dictionary definitions. I thought the dictionary actually did a pretty good job. What's a steward? One who manages another's property or financial affairs. One who administers anything as the agent of another. One who has the charge of the household of another, providing for the table, the direction of the servants, etc. A ship's officer who keeps the stores and arranges for the table. Any attendant on a ship, or we would even say an aircraft today, who waits on the passengers. You will notice something about this. All of the definitions for steward involve taking care of things for other people. Like there's no ownership there for a steward. Every aspect of the word includes the idea of serving other people. Are you a steward of the people who are in your life? So there's, I don't know how many people are here, but there's a good number of people here this morning, younger and older alike. Each one of you have a collection of people in your life. Do you know there's different kinds of people? You probably caught on to that already. Some of them are pretty adorable. You don't mind having them in your life. You actually hate to admit it, but you like them. You smile when they show up or when they're around. Maybe they're cuddly little children. Maybe they're a grandparent that you're just rather fond of. You have a couple of very good friends. Well, yes, they're in your life. You're responsible for them. You have some duties here. But there are other people in your life who are not cuddly. You're not so fond of them. Those are the people that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about stewardship involving the difficult people who are in your life. You don't have to raise your hand, but do you have some difficult person in your life? Like you actually would vote them out if you could vote them out. I think you do. Maybe some of you have more and some less. I learned a little lesson from a deacon friend. Ray Yoder Jr. is an Amish deacon in Ohio, and I was listening to him give a topic at a deacon seminar sometime recently. And he was talking about the word fellowship and taught me something I didn't know. I don't know how many of you can still read a German Bible, but if you go into the New Testament in the German Bible and you find the word for fellowship, it's the word Gemeinschaft. What is Gemeinschaft? You know, people who do translation work, they are particular people. They're trying to find just the right word or combination of words to express the original intent of the author. So the translators of the German Bible, the one used in the Amish church, they were struggling the word fellowship. What are we going to say in the German for fellowship? What's gemeint? Somebody surely still knows.
Club?
Nope.
Church.
Church. Gemeinhaus. The church house. Church. Schaft. You know Schaft, don't you? We can make that Schaft. We can make that work. The German word for fellowship is church work. Working in church. Making church work. They had another option they could have chosen. Gesellschaft. Gesellschaft means something different, a little bit different. You're working with others, but for your own benefit. Gesellschaft is kind of cold and calculating. What do I get out of this? Gemeinschaft is we are in this together. So you're from different congregations. You think about the congregation that you come from. What do you have in honesty where you come from? Do you have Gemeinschaft? We are in this together. We are going to make this work together. Or do you have Gesellschaft? Everyone is sort of in there on their own terms. I'm here because it suits me. And when it doesn't suit me, I shan't be here anymore. I'm in it for me. Which do you have? I think one of those two is a better illustration of stewardship than the other, and you can probably guess which of the two. You're responsible for the people that God places into your life. One of the interesting things you could do for Bible study sometime is to start at the beginning of the book of Genesis and start writing out the questions that you come to. Someone asks a question, write it down, and then think about the question that was asked. What's the first question that's ever asked in the Bible? What's the second question ever asked? The third question. One of the first questions that is asked in the Scriptures, as they are laid out for us in our Bibles, comes from Genesis 4:9. It was spoken by Cain. Cain was asked a question, and instead of answering, he threw back a different question. That's kind of what you do when you don't want to answer a question. Someone asks you something, and instead of answering their question, you ask them a different question instead because you don't want to answer their question. The question he asked is, am I my brother's keeper? It actually is a very good question. It's a question that you could study. If you're a preacher, you could preach on that question for a good long while. Am I my brother's keeper? The word keeper there in Hebrews has a specific meaning, or at least the way it was understood and taught by rabbis. A keeper is related to the idea of hedging something in, like building a fence around something. and a combination with the word for thorns. It's too much to take the time to explain here, but the idea is the idea of a sheepfold. In Old Testament times, they did not have high tensile wire and woven wire and barbed wire and electric wire to make their fences out of. So when they needed to make a place for constraining livestock, they had to work with what they had. They would often try to find a site that was naturally advantageous, like up against a cliff. At least nothing can come from the backside. And then they would dig up thorn bushes. We cut down thorn bushes. They would dig them up and plant them in a row to make a fence. And then they would make sure the thorn bushes got watered and taken care of. And the thorn bushes would grow and intertwine with each other and make like a thick hedge, a fence, that at least would slow down a predator that was attempting to get in to get the lambs. Am I my brother's hedge of thorns? Well, are you? If you have Gemeinschaft at your church, then you are your brother's hedge of thorns. You might even be willing to prick him once in a while. But you're not doing it out of spite, you're doing it for his good. You're trying to protect him. If you're in it for yourself, you're not going to go to that type of work. To be a good steward of the people who are in your life, I think you should first, let's establish the things that we can't do. You shouldn't waste your life. Your life's pretty limited. You don't want to waste the time you do have beating your head against the wall. So if there are things you can't do, don't waste your time doing them. Here are some things you can't do. You can't change your own life without the work of Jesus Christ in your heart. There are all sorts of people who attempt to do this. They attempt to do better. I'm going to do better. Doing better is the road to hell, because you can't get there. You can't get to righteousness on your own. You need Jesus Christ. And you know what? You might be able to wrap your head around that, but somehow we don't connect it to the fact that we can't change someone else's heart for them. You can't change your own, and you actually can't change their heart. Somebody can change their heart, but it's not you. You're just going to be a helper in this process, not the doer. You can't change all the situations in your own life. God made you the way He made you. You have the talents that you have. You have the deficiencies that you have. And some of your deficiencies can be rectified. You should be working on them. But some of your deficiencies you will carry your entire life. You will not get better at such and such a thing. You will always have a shortcoming. You can't fix your own life. Only Jesus Christ can do that. You can't change someone else's life for them either. You can't change someone else's life with logic and reason and good arguments. Do you know most people actually aren't dumb? There are some who are. Probably none in this room. But most people are smart enough that they're doing what they're doing on purpose. They are the way they are because that is how they want to be. They are reaping the consequences of the choices that they have intentionally made in their life. You actually can't craft a good enough of an argument to change their mind. They have to change their heart, and then their mind will automatically change. And here you're beating your head against the wall, trying to change their mind. You can't do it. Now, that doesn't mean you don't point out the consequences of their actions. Well, look what happened again. But that's not what's going to win the day. I don't think you can do it with emotional appeals either. Most people have a soft side, and some people have mostly a soft side. And if you lean on it hard enough, you can get them to do things. Have you recognized that yet? There are some people you can manipulate into doing things. Spiritually, I think that's a very bad idea. I grew up in a church setting where that was done very much. Like, you could be Peter and Paul, and when our preacher was finished preaching and gave the invitation, you would have to go forward, because he had worked you over so thoroughly that you surely had to repent of something. You can work on people's emotions. These difficult people, some of them, you can manipulate into making decisions, but you're actually not changing their heart. And you know what? I think you're doing a dangerous thing, because maybe you're making them think they're safe, and they're not safe. You need to be careful about emotional appeal, playing on someone's feelings. I don't think you can change someone's heart with threats either. Threats tend to produce one of two things. They might produce resistance, like fire is met with fire. And you've probably all been there with one of the difficult people in your life. You let them have it, and they let you have it right back. The other thing that force or threats generates is appearances. They don't want to catch it from you again, so they'll make sure they look like they've changed their heart. Again, you've helped put them in a very dangerous place. I don't think you can win someone's heart with rational arguments. I don't think you can win it with emotional appeals. And I don't think you can win it by threatening them. God can work in ways you cannot. Also, just lightly, I want to say I don't think you can change someone's situation for them. You can bail them out of a financial mess, but that doesn't erase the thing that got them into the financial mess. You can create dependency. You can become their Jesus, that you always come in and save their situation for them. They don't need you to be their Jesus. They need Jesus. You can go through your life apologizing for some difficult person, trying to make it look okay, make it look like they're okay, and they're actually not. That's not helping anyone. You could try to control a difficult person. Perhaps some of you who are a little older here, you have a difficult child. And as a parent, there's something in you that wants to control their behavior so that they look right, and then maybe they'll be right. Well, unfortunately, they can look right without being right. It's not wise to control another person in their life long term. It's not good for you. It's not good for them. If a person is not willing of their own accord, out of their own heart, to change, you are beating your head against the wall. You have some obligations to do, though, what you can do. What can you do for others? You can choose to love a person who is not always lovely. People do not tend to have just one problem in their life. You go to tackle one problem with a difficult person, you find out it was connected to something else. Kind of like, we're going to work on this area of your life right here, I care about it, and something over here is jiggling, because it is actually connected. When people have, they don't have a proper relationship with God, a vertical relationship, there's going to be all kinds of problems. I'm sorry, if they don't have a proper horizontal relationship, their relationship with God, it should come as no surprise that there's lots of problems out here vertically in their other relationships. When you see lots of problems in a person's vertical relationships, friendships, parents, children, marriage, there's probably something wrong here. And this is what needs to be fixed. We work on patching up and putting Band-Aids on these. Over here, the root problem is this. These people tend not to be lovely. Friendship is a two-way street. Like, you can be a friend to someone, but that doesn't mean they're a friend to you. But friendship is a two-way street, but love is not a two-way street. Love can be a one-way street. You can choose that you're going to love some person. And if you think about who the difficult person in your life is, well, ask yourself, do you love them? And maybe you do, and maybe you don't. But you should. You should love them. Because you were a difficult person too, and God loved you. So you ought to love them. You can choose to love. You can choose to give what you have to give. In 1 Kings chapter 17, there's an interesting little story about Elijah. Elijah had run away from Ahab. He had said it's not going to rain, so he went up in this little, we'd say he went up a hollow. He went up this little valley, and he stayed up there. He had water to drink out of the brook, and the ravens would bring him food. And then after a while, the brook dried up, and they had to go to plan B. Well, God did have a plan B. He didn't tell Elijah about it until it was needed, but he said, I want you to leave here, and you need to go to Zarephath, a particular place. And when you get there, I've appointed a widow woman to take care of you. I've picked out a particular person. I think that God tends to do that. God tends to pick out particular people in particular places to be stewards of other people. This person actually needs someone to look out for them. So someone mentioned last evening that they got a neighbor that's coming over. It's no accident that you bought that house or that they bought the other house. God has picked particular people to look out for other particular people. And if you've got a difficult person in your life, it just might be that you are the particular person who has been picked out to help that particular person with their particular problem. You have some responsibility. When Elijah gets there, he looks around and he sees a woman. He doesn't know if this is the woman or not that's supposed to take care of him. And he asks for a drink of water. Asking for a drink of water is asking for a common courtesy. If some stranger asked you for a drink of water, that is something you would do. You would do it for anybody. She agreed to do it. And as she turned to go get him a drink of water, he asked for something else. He said, and bring me a little bit of something to eat. And at this point, she objected. A common courtesy she was willing to do. You do common courtesies all the time for people in your life. But sometimes it becomes more than a common courtesy that's asked of you. It's actually an imposition on you. That's what difficult people do. They impose upon your life. They ask or demand or kind of consume from you things that you don't really want to give. He asked for something to eat. And she objected. She said, you don't understand my situation. I cannot help you. All I have is a little bit of meal and a tiny bit of oil, and I'm gathering up 2 sticks, and I'm going to make that, and we're going to eat it, and my son and I, we're going to starve and die then. Because that's all we have. I can't help you. I don't have the resources to help you. What she literally said was, I have the hollow of my hand full of meal. So I want you to take your hand and cup it. I think she probably, physically did this to show him. Look down in the hollow of your hand. How big is that? If she spoke the truth, she said, all I have is the hollow of my hand full of meal. She had a little pile of meal about that big. And this was a woman, so if you're a man, your hand's probably bigger than hers was. She said, that's all I have. I don't have the resources to help you. That's probably the excuse you use when you've got a difficult person in your life. I don't have the time for that person. I don't have the answers to that person's problems. They need to go away because this is getting inconvenient. Elijah told her, you don't need to be afraid of your poverty. He told her two things. He said, fear not and believe. Don't be afraid of what might happen to you, and go and make me a little cake first. She was willing to do it. It was probably an exceedingly little cake, like the size of a dime, if that's actually all she had. But she went and she did it, and then she received a blessing as a result. He told her, your little bit is never going to run out. I think there's a lesson in that for us. The widow, she was poor, but her poverty, her lack of resources was no obstacle for God. Because, in the end, she took a chance and believed. There's an example in the New Testament as well. It's also a poor widow. She was going through the line at the temple, and she threw 2 little coins into the collection box, 2 mites. And Jesus nudged his disciples sitting next to him. He said, did you see that? I don't think they had seen it. He said, did you see that? She gave more than everyone else. How could it be that a little poor widow, 2 little coins, gave more than the people with big sacks of money that they could pour in? Well, it's because God was in it. She gave what she had to God, and God could take your little bit and turn it into a great deal. So if you've got a difficult person in your life, it's probably true that you only have a little bit to work with. Unless you're proud, and then you're in a bad situation anyway. You think you've got more resources than you do. If you're humble enough to admit all you've got's a little bit. Got these difficult people, they got all these problems, I don't know what to do, I don't have the answers, I can't solve their problems for them. If that's where you think you're at, you're in an excellent position. Because if you will believe God and use the little bit that you have, I think it is true that He will never let your little bit run out. Your little bit will do far more than you think it could do. Another thing you could do for difficult people in your life is you could tell them the truth. You know, one of the problems people have is that they don't have enough truth in their life. They might have grown up not knowing truth. They weren't taught like you were taught. Their family or their church, or maybe they didn't have a church, but there was failure there. They don't have enough truth in their life. They need someone who is willing to speak truth to them. Now the scripture says, what does it say? You are to speak the truth in love. But what's the first part of the verse? You are to speak the truth. You are to tell people the truth. Do you know how easy it is not to tell the truth? You're not going to tell them a lie, but you're not going to say the truth. Because you think the truth would be embarrassing to them or to you or to everybody. So I'll just keep my mouth shut. One of the things that you can do, if you can do it biblically, if you can speak the truth in love, you can tell truth, hard things, to people who need to hear hard things. You can pick and point a direction. You actually don't have to have all the answers. I slipped into a session at Reach, the Reach convention, last time it was in Lancaster. It's a good thing, you should go there sometimes. I slipped into the back of a session, and I think it actually was Mr. Val's session. And I wrote down something the speaker said that I thought was pretty good. So if it didn't come from Val, other good things came from Val, but The speaker said something like this, as near as I could write it down: in every situation, no matter how dire, there's always a next right thing that could be done. Maybe you can't fix everything in this person's life. You can't wrap up the whole ball of wax and be done with it today. This isn't a problem that's solved in 10 minutes. But there's always a next right thing that you could do. So we can't solve your whole problem, but what is the right next thing you could do? Could an apology be made, even if the other person doesn't accept it? Could you stop doing something that you're doing now, even if you don't think it would make a difference, but stop doing it because it would be the right thing to do? In every situation, no matter how dire, there's always a next right thing that can be done. And sometimes the difficult person doesn't know what that is. You're like, well, duh. Just do it. They don't know what to do. They've messed their life up enough that they don't know what's next. Maybe they think they've ruined their life. Like there's no coming back. I can't go back. Well, maybe you can't go back today, but you could do this. You could write a letter to this person and tell them you're sorry for what you said and sorry for what you did. There's always something right to do. God doesn't leave us in impossible situations where there's no right thing you could do to fix it. You could maintain and expand confidences. You know, difficult people tend to have burnt bridges in their life. You have to be very careful with them. If you betray their confidence, you're done. You shall not be able to help them anymore. They've been down that road before and they figure out that you're just like all the rest. You got to be exceedingly careful here. If you need to tell someone else, you need to tell them that you need to tell someone else. You need to be very careful about confidences. You need to build confidences. Part of the reason they're in the place they are is because they've been the type of person they've been and they don't have friends anymore. They've executed all their friends long ago. You're going to have to take a chance to be this person's friend. You're going to have to take some blows to be this person's friend. You're going to be a person who's willing to build back bridges that have been burned down. I think most of you have some difficult person in your life. That's actually part of stewardship. It's more important than the money. And I'll go back to what I believe is true. I think you're wealthy people. I think you've actually got more to help them than you might think you do. Now maybe you've messed it up and you've gotten in the way, but you do have some biblical teaching. You can look back in your life, in your family, and in your church, and in your friends, and you do have some role models that these people know how to help other people. How did they do it? What type of person were they? Maybe I should even go talk to them and ask for help with this difficult person in my life. That's where we're going to wrap up today. You think about stewardship. Stewardship involves a lot more than your money. I think when we stand before God and we have to talk to Him about the things we did, the things that are written in the books, as it says in Revelation, it probably will be that there will be questions about our money and our things and our possessions. But I think there's going to be a lot more questions about the people who are in our lives. Questions about our parents, questions about our children and our siblings, questions about the people we go to church with, questions about the neighbors across the fence, the fellow who worked for us, the boss that we had, and about the difficult person in our life. You might not think that you have a lot to offer. You are in good company if you don't have a lot to offer. The widow at Zarephath did not have a lot to offer. The widow in the New Testament who went into the temple and dropped in 2 mites, she didn't have a lot to offer. And Jesus said she gave more than everybody else because she gave the 2 little bits that she had. You might think that your life's been rough enough. Well, maybe some of the roughness that you've had in your life's actually good. It's good for you and it's good for others. I like this little speech that John Roberts gave at a graduation in 2017. John Roberts is the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He was invited to speak at a school graduation. And surprise, surprise, he agreed. He agreed to go to this school and to speak to the students. This is what he told the students. Didn't speak for a long time. Short little speech. He said, "Commencement speakers will typically wish you good luck and extend good wishes to you. I will not do that, and I will tell you why. From time to time in the years to come, I hope that you will be treated unfairly, so that you will come to know the value of justice. I hope that you will suffer betrayal, because that will teach you the importance of loyalty. Sorry to say, but I hope you will be lonely from time to time, so that you don't take friends for granted. I wish you bad luck, again, from time to time, so that you'll be conscious of the role chance plays in life, and understand that your successes are not completely deserved, and that the failures of others are not completely deserved either. And when you lose, as you will from time to time, I hope every now and then your opponent will gloat over your failure. It's a way for you to understand the importance of sportsmanship. I hope you will be ignored, so you know the importance of listening to others. And I hope you will have just enough pain to learn to be compassionate. Whether I wish these things or not, they're going to happen, and whether you benefit from them or not will depend on your ability to see the message in your misfortunes."